The elders always said the first theft is never of flesh or gold, but of attention. And when Elias Crow lifted the old brass camera to his eye, standing knee-deep in red dust at the edge of the canyon, he did not yet understand that what he framed inside the glass was not a body, but a boundary that had never been crossed by a living outsider. Because the woman who stood there, taller than the cottonwoods and broad as the cliff face behind her, was not simply a giant Apache woman, but a living vessel of the sky breath, her shadow moving before her like a second spirit, her skin carrying the color of sun-baked stone and storm clouds, her eyes holding a patience older than the river, and when the shutter clicked, it sounded too loud, like a bone snapping in the silence, and the world seemed to inhale sharply as if offended. Because among her people it was believed that an image could bind intention, that a lens could trap what the eye was not worthy to hold. And Elias, a man who had crossed deserts chasing vanishing, cultures with a camera, and a stubborn hunger to be remembered, felt his hands tremble as the air thickened, the wind bending toward her as if listening. And the giant woman, Nailin, did not roar or strike but lowered her gaze, slowly to him. And in that moment he felt something pulled, not from her but from himself, a warmth sliding out of his chest and into the camera. And the elder's warning echoed in his mind too late, because the photograph was taken and the soul thread between observer and observed was tied. And Nalin turned away without a word, stepping back into the canyon shadows where stone swallowed sound, leaving Elias alone, with a camera that now felt heavy, as a heart filled with blood that was not his own. And as he walked back toward his camp, the desert seemed to watch him, the stones remembering his footfalls, the ravens circling lower. And that night his dreams were not his, filled with drum beats that shook his ribs, fires burning under open stars, warriors standing in rings with painted faces and spears tipped with moonlight. And always Nalin at the center, her expression neither angry nor afraid, but burdened, as if something essential had been misplaced. And when Elias woke before dawn, his camera was warm, humming faintly, the developed image already ghosted on the glass, despite no chemicals touching it, showing Nalin frozen mid-turn, her eyes reflecting not the canyon, but his own face staring back at him. And that was when the fear finally arrived, cold and precise. Because he realized the photograph had not stolen her soul entirely, it had taken a claim, a tether, a promise that could only be answered one way. And far away in the high mesas, the Apache drums began, slow at first, then answering one another across the land, warriors painting their skin with ash and ochre, tightening leather straps. Because the law was clear. When a soul is bound without consent, it must be retrieved, and the one who binds it must stand before the tribe. And as Elias packed his gear with shaking hands, convincing himself it was coincidence, folklore, imagination, he did not notice the tracks forming around his camp at sunrise, bare, footprints the size of shields, spear marks pressed deep into stone, symbols carved into the earth promising pursuit. And if you feel the tension rising right now, if this world has pulled you in, and you want to know what happens when ancient law meets modern obsession, this is the moment to subscribe. Because what comes next is a reckoning that will change every soul involved. And Chapter 1 is only tightening the snare as the warriors begin their march, and the camera continues to whisper, calling its owner back to a canyon where the debt was born. The time Elias realized the desert itself had become a witness against him. It was already too late to run, because the pursuit did not come with the sound of war cries or the chaos of violence, but with a terrifying calm, a certainty that felt heavier than fear. And as he drove his battered truck along the cracked earth roads, the camera on the passenger seat vibrated softly like a living thing, growing warmer with every mile, as if drawing him not away but back toward the canyon. And when the first Apache warrior appeared on the ridge at sunset, silent, towering, his silhouette cutting the sky like a blade, Elias's heart sank with the understanding that this was not a chase meant to end in bloodshed, but a summons he could no longer ignore. Because the law of the tribe did not demand revenge, it demanded balance, and one by one they emerged from the land itself. Giants and men alike moving together, faces painted with the symbols of wind, stone, and memory, their footsteps slow and deliberate, as if the earth had agreed to carry them without protest. And Elias stepped out of his truck with empty hands raised, his voice trembling as he tried to explain intention, ignorance, art. But words collapsed in the presence of something older than language. And when Nalin finally appeared among them, her height dwarfing even the tallest warriors, her eyes met his, not with hatred but with sorrow, because the photograph had weakened her connection to the sky breath, the spirit that allowed her to stand between worlds. And the elders spoke through her voice, explaining that the camera had not stolen her soul like a thief steals gold. It had anchored it, pulling part of her essence into an object bound by human desire to capture and own. And the only way to release it was for Elias to willingly surrender not just the image, but the reason he took it. To stand within the circle, to face what the camera had awakened in him. And as the ritual began under a sky torn open by stars, Elias was stripped of his equipment, his identity as an observer erased, forced to kneel as the warriors formed a ring, drums beating not in anger but in truth. And when he placed the camera on the stone altar, it screamed, not in sound but in feeling, flooding his mind with every image he had ever taken, every face frozen and abandoned, every culture consumed and left behind, until he broke, sobbing, admitting that he had chased legacy instead of understanding, possession instead of permission. And in that confession the camera cracked, light spilling out like breath returning to lungs, Nalin gasping as her strength surged back, the tether dissolving, the canyon exhaling at last. And when dawn came, Elias expected punishment, exile, death even. But instead, the elders chose mercy bound to consequence, allowing him to live on the edge of their land as a keeper of stories without a lens. A man who would warn others that not everything sacred is meant to be captured. And years later, when travelers speak of a quiet man who tells a story about a giant, Apache woman and a camera that tried to steal a soul, they say he ends every telling the same way, looking directly into the firelight and into the listener's eyes, reminding them that some stories are given, not taken. And if this story moved you, if you felt the weight of ancient lore and modern obsession collide, then don't let it fade like a forgotten photograph. Subscribe to the channel, because many more powerful stories are waiting to be told, and the next one may bind your attention just as tightly. Time did not heal the canyon the way Elias believed it would, because some balances, once disturbed, echo far beyond the moment of correction. And though the soul thread had been released and Nalin had returned, fully to the sky breath, the act of witnessing had changed both worlds forever, and Elias, now living in a small adobe shelter at the edge of Apache land, learned that silence could be louder than drums, that memory could weigh more than a camera ever had. And each night, as he sat by the fire telling travelers the story, he felt the land listening, testing whether his words carried humility or hunger. And one winter evening, when the stars burned unusually bright, Nalin appeared again, not as judgment but as confirmation, standing beyond the firelight, taller than before yet softer somehow, telling him that stories, when told with respect, could become bridges instead of chains, and that his punishment had never been exile but responsibility, to speak so others would not repeat his mistake. And as she faded back into the night, Elias finally understood that the soul he had nearly stolen was not hers alone, but his own humanity, returned only when he learned to let go. And if this chapter left you reflecting, if you want more stories where ancient power meets modern choices and every action has a cost, subscribe now, because the next story will be waiting, watching, and ready to be told.